Hello and welcome back to another update as we cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. We start out in the Novomikhailivka direction where the Russian forces launched yet another attack, getting closer and closer to the Ukrainian positions within the city. As such, we see that they've reached the outskirts yet again, and this time they have firm control over it. With this, we see that the next one will definitely make an entrance into the city, which shows the amount of pressure the Russian forces are launching against Ukrainian defensive positions within the city. We see that the Ukrainian forces are heavily pressured all throughout the front line, with this month being the worst performing month for the Ukrainian army since I started recording territorial changes. We see so far that the Russian forces have managed to make 63 advances throughout this month, and the Ukrainians are down to just 2 advances in this month. I say the worst performing since I started recording because I wasn't present for the first half year of the war, so the first few months where the Russians made major advances towards Kiev, Kherson and so on were not recorded by me. Therefore, this is the most since the start of the stalemate / when the Ukrainians counterattacked. This is the month where the Russian forces have performed the best and the Ukrainian forces performed the worst. One of the reasons for this switch is that the Ukrainian forces are tired after the 6 months long offensive, and at the same time the Russian forces kept increasing the amount of soldiers they had available in the front line. With the yearly Putin press conference yesterday, Putin said that 617,000 Russian soldiers were present within Ukraine. That is 3 times as many as what they started with. So this is a huge increase of soldiers fighting within the military zone. As such, we see that there's a much larger pressure on the Ukrainian forces compared to the start. The Ukrainian forces have naturally also increased in size, but comparatively the Russians have increased 3 times, while the Ukrainians possibly 2 to 3 times, of which they have just launched a 6 month long offensive, which caused them to be tired, and now they're moved into the defensive. We also see videos like this one with Russian tanks being unloaded to go to the front line here in Ukraine. We then move to the north of Novomikhailivka, where we see that the Russian forces have continued their pressure here to the southeast of Vuhledar, trying to advance towards Novomikhailivka from the north. So we are seeing that the Russian forces again continue their operations in 3 different directions: to the north of Novomikhailivka, to the east of the city, and to the south here by the fields and forest lines. So we see that the Russian forces continue their operations in 3 different directions. This is to pressure the Ukrainian defenders and spread them out with the Russian numerical superiority in the area. We also see operations in the direction of Vuhledar, where there has been a map correction, where the Ukrainian forces have control over the area here by Vuhledar completely. The area right here is somewhat in the gray zone as they are under direct fire by the Russian forces, but the Russian forces do not have control over it. As such, the front has moved according to its place, but there's been new Russian operations in the direction of the village of Vuhledar, directly from Marinka, after the Russian forces made full control over the central part of the city. As for the northern part, we see continuous advances by the Russian forces, where they managed to catch this area here yesterday, and today they managed to capture yet another point at the northern part of the city. With this, we see continuous advances by the Russian forces, trying to gain full control over the city by pushing westwards. And this is likely a continuous advancement after the Ukrainian forces abandoned the village after deciding to pull back to better fortified positions, because Marinka is completely destroyed, leaving them no place to actually defend the city without taking more casualties than any other fortified areas. We then move on to the Avdiivka direction, where in the northern flank the Russian forces have managed to gain control further of parts of Stepove, and they've managed to gain control over the forest line here to the south of the village. With this, there's continuous advancements by the Russian forces to gain control over Stepove, but the Ukrainian defenders are holding on with a very strong force. Therefore, the Russian forces are not able to take the village completely yet, as the fighting continues within the village. We also see that they managed to advance slightly here to the north by the railways, where they've managed to gain further control over the forest lines here to the north and to the west, and advance further by the railway itself. So we see continuous pressure by the Russian forces here in the northern flank. There's also been some reports of fighting here in the south, reaching this road here, the Lermontova Street. According to some reports, the Russian forces managed to gain control and are fighting within the street itself, but this has yet to be confirmed by Syriac maps, therefore I'm not changing the territory until it is. But the report is there, which shows that the Russian forces are looking to widen the front here in the south, which indicates that they are sending a lot of forces in this direction, which corresponds with the increased amount of reinforcements arriving here in the area. So with this, we see that when Putin said 617,000 troops are within Ukraine, it is likely that there was a recent increase and recent rotation that increased the amount of soldiers in the front line, as we see that there's been increased pressure in the direction of Avdiivka, Marinka, Novomikhailivka, Bakhmut, and we still see that the Russian forces have the upper hand in the Zaporizhia direction, and they also have a significant concentration of forces in the north, which indicates that these soldiers, these reinforcements that arrived at the front, came from Russia and not from within Ukraine, rotating from one front to another. So these are fresh troops arriving at the front to help out the soldiers already fighting there with the experience they have. This allows them to increase the fighting strength and their abilities to conduct offensive operations, but it also increases the amount of casualties received, as some of these troops will be fresh and have no combat experience, which is always very critical. As a anti-government organization within Belarus that covers and reports the development of the Belarusian army, according to them, the Russian army has been training the Belarusian army since April of last year. That is now a year and 8 months. And despite that, they still write at a weekly update that the exercises have been extended. Yet the Belarusian army is not ready for any offensive operations due to the lack of combat experience. Combat experience is what makes the difference between someone who knows what to do against someone who just does it. You can train all you want, but in the end, someone who has done it has more abilities than the one who has been doing it. Compared to the job market, when you finish a bachelor degree, master's degree, PhD, whatever it is, you still go to the job market and they request, yes, your qualifications that are theoretical, but in the end, they always add 5 years of experience working as this, 2 years of experience working as that, because in the end, the experience means much more to them than the actual degree. But then again, no one can really be picky because you cannot gain combat experience without fighting, and fighting either has to be defensive or offensive. So either case, you cannot gain combat experience without a war, unless the Belarusian soldiers pick on a Wagner patch after training with Wagner for a couple of months and thinking, well, we belong here now, and then goes to the front when the Wagner forces return, and there's suddenly 100,000 Wagner forces instead of 50,000. But moving on to the Bakhmut direction, we see that the Russian forces managed to gain further control over the fortified area here to the west of Hormove. There's a bunch of trench networks here that goes through this area and has a lot of connections, something like this. And the Russian forces now have gained control over parts of it with their recent advances. We see here that they've managed to make significant advances within the trench area. And we also see Russian advances here by the forest lines, by the railways. So again, the Russian forces continue their advances here in the center. And there's also a lot of pressure coming from the north and northwest of Vuhledar. So with this, the Russian forces continue their advances here to the northern flank of Bakhmut, and the pressure continues by the Hormova road, the railways, and Vuhledar. We then move on to the Rostolivka area, where the Russian forces managed to yet again advance by the railways. It seems that the railways is the way to go for the Russian forces, and they're getting closer and closer to Rostolivka, both from the east and the west, here to the south of the village. Fighting continues here in the railways northeast of Vasile as well, but there's been no territorial advances by the Russian forces. And that is all of the territorial changes for today. We have this short article here where there has been some leaked US documents that state that the Russian forces were jamming GPS-guided bombs that the US had given to Ukraine. Russia fields many advanced jamming capabilities, including some jammers that can block GPS signals at ranges of up to 15 miles, which is a about 27 kilometers. Ukrainian soldiers have reported that the Russian jammers frequently down their drones and may also be behind problems with using the widely used Starlink satellite internet system. So this is a part of the front line that we don't really get to hear that much about due to the classified nature of jamming capabilities, electronic warfare capabilities, but it does seem that the Russian electronic warfare systems are able to deal with a lot of the smart systems that the US has sent to Ukraine. For example, the GPS guided signals of up to 15 miles, that would include the GPS guided artillery systems that the Ukrainians have received from the West. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.